you could have guessed, right? Of course, the self-driving car algorithm would just run that person over. And so, like the guy who doing the algorithm say, "Oh, wait, we just need more data, right? More, sample of this." And so they collect a lot of sample of people on the wheelchair crossing the road. And you guys guess what happened after they do the training? The algorithm would still run over the person, but even with greater confidence, right? Because there's no sample, there's no sample of that. And so how do you guys address this issue, for the overfitting, for the buyers? Any tips that you would give to the audience?
I think I can answer that question because, as I mentioned several times today, we in our group we study a lot about uncertainty modeling, right? So nowadays all of our models are probabilistic. So for in-domain data, we can predict with high confidence. For out-of-domain data, our model should be able to predict with low confidence. One example that we have already deployed is Caption Bot. So before this, I used to work on image captioning, and we productized our image caption engine. And if you try captionbot.ai for image that are out of domain, the bot would say, "I'm not so confident." So when you have the confidence output, it helps the downstream planner to do to make a more informed decision and do the right thing. Yeah.
So in our domain, it's almost impossible to create context. For example, psychometric is quite interesting approach in evaluating creditors by asking people a bunch of questions. But if you do that with mechanical Turks, and it's going to fail because people don't have the pressure that a borrower would face when they apply for a $2,000 loan for, let's say, to send their kids to school. So I don't have an answer for that. So the only way that we deal with that is actually to get more and more partnerships and get the data from the actual context, and with the hope that with enough banks participating in contributing the data, it's going to cancel out some part of the natural bias or intentional bias, but we actually don't have an answer for that.
In our case, it's more of like trying to set the ground rules also with the companies that we're working with, that we can try different types of varieties on how to evaluate the model. And I think as shared by Sir a while ago, it's more of like testing it out on the real data. Because when you work with companies, you try to like do it first on the corporate, like on the research setting first. So you have a lot of variety on how you can like evaluate model, you can do your train test, validation split, and so on. But it's more of like after you do it, testing it out on the wild data is very, very also important. So it's more of like trying to also improve the model as you go on, depending on how the data, how the collection of data that you would be having.
I think I will add no more.
Yeah, I agree with Nguyen that I think it's a difficult problem. I think we don't have a way to reduce bias, but we can have a way to check for bias. So people start thinking about adversarial examples. Things like you start a fake, in America, self-driving car, we have a stop sign, right? So it stops. What if you draw the stop sign on the paper? We will also stop as well. So things like that. So I think adversarial is something that people try to work on. It's become a new area. And then I also want to touch a point that people talk about, like fairness, equal gender. Like when you translate, you don't want to over translate into like male gender for languages like French. So people do check for that. Yeah, I think we don't have a way to reduce the bias, but we can verify. We can try to understand our model a little bit more. People start talking about explainable AI. How do you pick inside your model to see what is actually working? Like by looking at, for example, when it's making decisions, what part of the image the model is paying attention to. So by doing that, we hopefully can address some issues.
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating topic because, like we're building AI, supposed to be inclusive, right? Because, they're building for the world population. And in fact, there are a lot of, people with disability, older people and things like that. And it's just like baked in natural bias when you collect data, even with like, sampling, right? Once you sample, large enough, then, you still have that bias. So let me switch gear a little bit and ask you maybe like, more general question. So Elon Musk say that, we should be worried about AI, AI is going to kill us all and, it's the end of the world. So what are your thoughts on this? Which camp are you on? And again, right, this question is going to be inside this room. No one is going to talk about this except live streaming on Facebook, of course, but,
I think so. I think so. I mean, just kidding. Just kidding. I don't know how to say, but um, I mean, even in VietAI, we try to nurture talents in AI so that many software engineers they can understand about AI, so they can have a better way to build up the next system in AI. So I strongly believe that VietAI will not build any virtual assistant or a robot to kill us, to kill people.
Yeah, I think so. It's more of probably yes in the future. I don't know, but that's my thought. But it's more of like, how do you prevent that from happening, right? So it's as shared. It's more of like instilling the right understanding on how artificial intelligence are built, because sometimes people would just use black box model without them knowing how it is working. So a lot of APIs are out there, and when you ask them like, how does it work, they don't know it works. It just works, and that's it. So it's more like scary in the notion that someone would actually build something that they know how it works. It's kind of scary, right? So it's more of like instilling that specific principle that when you invest yourself, you need to like understand how it works. So it's more of like pushing towards education, helping developers understand deeper context and deeper like understanding on how these algorithms relatively works.
To me, the threat of general AI to human, it is not something that we focus every day on. Instead, we want to give $100, $200 to people who don't have that to buy a motorbike. Having said that, I believe that before we understand how the brain works, how knowledge and pre-populated model transfer from one generation to another generation through DNA and so on, until we understand how brains works and collectively how human brains work and passing through generations, the advancement in current AI is, I would say, baby step comparing to the threat that had been claimed.
I think that Elon Musk he probably was on marijuana.
On something, yeah.
so
He's just trying to sell cars, so.
So I have nothing to comment.
Yeah, so I'm on the positive camp. So I think we have a lot of positive hope about benefit that AI gonna brings to us. I think like you can think about, we can speed up drug discovery. Right now it takes like 10 or 20 years to build a new drug. With AI, we can, run experiment on the computer to know what kind of trial we can do, so that we can save time. And we might be able to cure cancer, or like longevity, live forever. I don't know, like cure aging. I think there are a lot of exciting opportunities. Self-driving cars that save lots of life. I think maybe in the next 5 years, people won't be allowed to drive in the highway. I think it's pretty soon. And the other thing that we need to be careful about is we need to be prepared for the changes. I think there will be lots of jobs that might disappear. I don't know, like even maybe in the future, you can just like do coding by just speaking instead of typing, you know. It frees us from low-level jobs. You don't have to code the same algorithm again and again. You can just say, hey, let's write a code that sort this array for me, and it just write for you. So we will have a chance to do more high-level work. I think, but we need to be prepared. We need to have the skill set to be ready for that new changes.
All right, well, great answer. I'm glad you guys are all positive, because otherwise I'll just split you guys up and then I'll be done, right? Have you guys debating against each other. So I think I'm on the same camp. There are 2 points I would like to bring up. So one is actually, you know, like, I think the objective function, right, the reward can be baked into the algorithm to make it become more altruistic, right? You know, of course, you know, if the only reward is you care about the payoff, how much the algorithm is making, then, you know, they will be, you know, the monopolists or like, you know, playing trick to the other guys. But if, you know, there's certain thing that you can bake into the reward function about, okay, you know, how about being nice to people and stuff, I think that's another thing that we can go. And then on the job points of view, I think, yes, a lot of jobs are going to be out of business, you know, unfortunately. But I think AI would create a lot more new jobs as well, right? If you think about the internet, if you think about the web, you know, 10, 20 years ago, people were afraid of, yes, you know, it's going to take away a lot of different jobs. But also, you know, who ever knew that web designer and web developers become such a lucrative career, right? You know, a lot of people are getting you know, a lot of money for this kind of job. So anyway, so I just want to end you know, our discussion on a positive note to open up questions to the audience. Anyone want to raise your hand, ask questions? Any new face? Okay, a lady first. One lady. Okay, no lady. Okay, how about on the other corner? Yes.
So when I saw Mr. Leung Văn Thang question, will you be the next like Google brain? I just have a weird thought that like I will never be a Google brain, but the fact that Google is currently my brain now. Yeah, when I encounter a problem, maybe the first thing I do is asking my mom, and the second thing is I searching on Google. And so I think that when you know, we have many like recommendation system now, like Spotify. If you want to listen to some music, just open the Spotify and will show you. And so I think like technology is subconsciously like control my mind. And my question is like, will we act the same in the future? Like,
yeah, this is a great question, right? And that's actually brought up another point of fake news. Fake news, you know, made the elections in the U.S. So, you know, again, right? So this bias of the technology, and you know, somehow we got really influenced by the technology, by the recommendation, kind of live in the bubble. So how do we counter that? Okay, maybe just one or two answer, and then we'll move ahead. Maybe Kenneth?
Yeah, I think the fake news is a good problem because it will create new jobs. So we have been talking about AI will eliminate jobs, but fake news will create new jobs for the faker and also for the fake news fighters. And the fake news fighters need to be trained in AI and machine learning in order to find the fake news. It's similar to the security problem. There will always be hackers, and there will always be white hat security researchers. So that's a good problem.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I would like to add another point that there are two things that you should consider, right? One is exploitation, and the other one is exploration, right? So once you explore enough the space, how much do you want to go? So like going wide or going deep, right? And so you can always balance between the two. Let's say you've been going deep for a while, time to go explore more, right? And so those are the two variables you can use to kind of counterbalance each other. All right. Next question. Dressing social.
Test 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm Kat from Trusting Social as one of data scientists. I have two questions actually. One is about the open data collaboration. If you want to, you need to create incentive for people to contribute their intimate data into the, for example, medical data. You can do like Google DeepMind in the UK to collect an NHS record, but for me it's quite sensitive and illegal because without consent it could not be used. So how do we create that system based on blockchains or whatever technology to encourage that kind of sharing? Because it will become a very valuable and good data for mining to do whatever. The second thing is about the ethics of AI. So how far can we accept AI to manipulate our emotion? That is the question.
Great questions. Ethics also include, you know, let's say a car running down the street, right? There's like an old lady and there's a bus of, you know, full of children. And, you know, you have to choose where to, you know, swerve and avoid. How do you choose? So any insights from our panel?
Yeah, I think you know that recently people start putting up like a partnership on AI where people start to discuss about AI safety, principle of AI for the future, so that we don't get like robot that's gonna destroy us. So we have some. I think people are start thinking about steps to address those.
I think the first question about the data ownership and data sharing is a very deep question. I spent a lot of time thinking about this as well, and I think the current state of data ownership is extremely unfair, and data should have been owned by people, not by corporations. But unfortunately, probably 99% of people data is actually owned by corporates, and hopefully the decentralized systems can help us in the future. I think this is a kind of a question for the next decade. So we're gonna have to wait a little bit before the world come out with a much fairer way of owning and sharing data. On the second question about AI manipulating our emotions, I think it's actually resonate with the previous question. And also, it's actually not just emotion, but understanding, right? So if we live in this bubble of Google for the liberals, or Google for the conservative, eventually we're gonna live in a very different bubbles. And what is the reality? Actually, this is a very deep question. So 15 years ago when I talked to the first Catholic that I really talked, you know, as a friend, and he said, I asked him like, why did he believe that Jesus actually exists? And his answer was that because people after him keep telling the story. So I laughed and said, but there's no document, it's just story. And he said, but World War II only exists in stories. It is in books, in photos, but it's still stories. And now we are in a world that anyone can create a story or reality which look beautiful, and probably some in the next few decades can communicate directly with our senses. Then what is the future of human? That's actually a very deep question that I don't know an answer, but would like to throw it out there if any one of you have an answer.
Yeah, very deep question. I think like the first one, can we act in the same way, and emotion. So I have some of my friends, they are Christian. I'm a Buddhist, and some of my friends, they have no religion. So maybe in the next few years, some of us, we accept AI with emotion, but some of us, we don't accept it. I'm not sure, but I mean, human perception is something very complicated to model. I'm not sure the day, but neuroscience could be the next topic for many researchers around the world.
So one thing I do know that people have been trying to making social robots, robots with emotion, and they resoundingly failed. A lot of money went into that, and they just couldn't deliver. Jibo is one big example. So I think it's still the frontier of technology, right? Anyway, next question.
All right. Quick comment on the topic of data efficient learning. So we have like engineer methods, which works really well, right? With data, I mean data efficient methods. And then on the other hand, we have deep learning methods, which we use like bit-fed model, simple models, and then we feed a lot of data. And then in the middle, we have like of the spectrum, we have methods like combining both of the both worlds. So, for example, we have deep symbolic systems or neurologic learning, combining logic layer and then neural network layers. So I think those are the areas that we need to pursue more to achieve like more data efficient methods. Now I have a question for Thang. Even though you try to avoid talking about like dialogue generation systems, but I want to hear more about the work at the Google brand, especially those related to the thought vectors and the consciousness prior, something related to those. I mean like those with kind of high level priors or constraints that deviate a lot from the maximum likelihood modeling.
Yeah, I guess I can't comment on internal work right now, but I think we do have an interest in dialogue and chatbot. It's a difficult problem, I would say. I think one of the key problems is how do you measure progress? I think that is the question, not only for researchers, but also for the AI practitioners. Even when you build companies, you need to define a clear metric to know the progress of your companies and the progress of your research. So we have a great success with machine translation because we can measure it. People call it blue score. But blue score just failed for dialogue because there's just many ways of replying to the same context. Whereas for translation, even though there could be slightly different ways, but they all have the same meaning. So which is why we sort of almost we have a great success for machine translation, but dialogue is still challenging. I think if we can solve the metric problems, we would make a good progress on dialogue and chatbots.
Thanks, but my question is more about like representation issue, like how any like research focus on representing thoughts, like to generate conversations.
So just a big vector, like a large vectors, yeah, just a bigger models, deep models, so everything.
Still grounded in data?
Pardon me?
Still grounded in data, or like any way we can kind of like encode our prior knowledge?
Yeah, I think this is a good question, but we don't have a good way right now. I mean, of course, you can always ground into you can connect your dialogue to knowledge graph. For example, like people already extract facts like Barack Obama is a husband of Michelle Obama, but they're actually a different debate. We debate a lot at Google as well. Do you really need knowledge graph, or you can just learn everything from the text? Because knowledge graph is built from text, right? So can you just go ahead and just learn from text? So I think there's a different angle of looking at the problems. Maybe just a big model, huge computation, lots of TBU. You can just learn everything from text.
Thank you. A lot of like for the Vietnamese group at Google brand.
I have a wide yes that Google brain is working on the thought tensor. Thought tensor, right? They released TensorFlow, but do you see any tensor in it? Probably not. So so thought tensor would be cool.
Let's work on that.
Wait, so actually, you know, that remind me, Microsoft, I think, is having a better Chinese machine translation than Google. And why is that? Any comments on this?
So there's a news article that Microsoft reached parity for translating between English and Chinese. But there's a few questions about the test set. It's like, I think like it's, yeah. And the kind of the human translation that they compare to is not very high quality. So that's one thing. And I would say like in the academia, the best model right now is based on transformer architecture. That was from Google.
I do not disagree, but I just want to add another perspective. Microsoft research has been around in China for a long time. We have great researchers in China. Google, on the other hand, really ignored China. So you don't, yeah, there's no Google researcher in China. So I think that's the unfair advantage of Microsoft. Yeah.
MSI.
Yeah. So I actually, to clarify a little bit, I think Microsoft did have a very good system for English and Chinese. The question of human barrier is still in discussions. But I think in the past, Microsoft researchers also managed to make a few like milestones. For example, like they reach close human performance of speech recognition. Or recently, they have like reached human performance for question answering. But these are still relative. For example, for question answering, they reach human performance. But these, again, you know, human performance are quite relatively depending on how you collect your data set, right? If you collect rating from only 3 normal human, it's a different story. But if you collect from 3 high educated people who can answer the question very well, and that's a different story. And then even after those claims, people can still make further progress. So I mean, the bus system that I mentioned is the one that, you know, I think right now stay at the top, also from Google.
Okay, so just one point. So the authors of the Birch paper, most of them actually came from MSR. So they just stole people from us. And they have better compute infrastructure, which I admit. Yeah. Yeah.
More questions? Phong?
Yeah, thank you very much for the, I think it's truly world-class discussions over here. And yeah, while debating between Google and Microsoft. But I want to say something that probably most of you here don't have, but Tuk actually has it. So it's about the interaction between machine and human. So AI, it seems like the brain, and where's the body, right? How's system going to interact with human in the future? You know, we have the smartphone right now, but we envision a future where robot is actually working together with human. So it seems like people and lots of companies are investing a lot in the brain, but without investing enough for the body. Mechanical design and engineering has been a bit lagging behind, I guess. And even Japan, where I'm from right now, still also investing a lot in robotics. So what do you see, you guys from US and some of you from Vietnam? And so what do you see that gap between robot and AI? The body and the brain.
I promise I didn't plan this question. It's all his question, okay? For you guys. So the gap between AI and robotics, right? So AI is all in the cloud, you know, on your smartphone. It's a virtual world, and you know, robotics actually, giving it the body to the AI, you know, if you will, it's a soul. And then so, you know, the gap is still there. So how do you see this gap is